All right, so today I'm taking a break from the Claude Architect exam to talk about a question that I see on Reddit quite often. And that question is, why does AI break my code? Now, there are a couple of scenarios that come to mind when we talk about that question. And the first scenario is something that I experienced, I guess, about a little over a year ago while working on a project. I basically had a drop down menu on a web page, and a drop down menu is just a list of options that I can pick from. And while I was developing the application, I had this list in a static format. So, in other words, all of it was in HTML. And this particular drop down appeared on three different places within my website. So at some point during development, I said, I think it would be nice to have this in a database table, and then I can read this data and show it on the web page whenever I need to. And so this way, if I need to add a new option, I can just go to the database, add the row there, and it'll show up on my front end right away. So I asked AI to make that change, and it did so. But what it actually ended up doing is changing two out of three pages, leaving one as a static HTML list. So this is not something that I caught right away. Being a relatively bad tester of applications, I checked a couple of things out right after it made the change, and I didn't notice the fact that one of them was untouched. So it wasn't for a couple of weeks until I realized that, oh, gee, like these two work, but this other drop down on this one page doesn't work at all. And I realized that AI made a goof. The other scenario that could happen is that you ask AI to fix a bug, something that you see on a page while you're testing it within your application. And as it fixes that, it breaks something else. Now, maybe you catch that something else right away, but typically it's a silent failure, meaning it's made a code change, everything still compiles and runs, but you may not see it for 2 or 3 days. And by the time you do see it, you might be blaming the wrong prompt and the wrong session for that particular error. The other scenario that comes to mind, and is also one that I've seen, we've all probably seen it at one point or another, is the loop of doom. And this is where you kind of iterate over and over again over trying to fix a particular bug, and it fixes something, breaks something else. You tell it to fix that. It fixes the second thing, but breaks the original one. And you're just constantly sort of iterating over those two problems. And it never seems to get better. No matter what you do, you're caught in some sort of a loop that you can't climb out of. And so I think there are definitely a couple of things that you can do to make this easier on yourself. Some of that does go back a couple of steps before you write any code and work towards your planning. So right now I'm going to give you the top 4 things that you can do to make that easier on you and to prevent those types of issues from happening in the first place. This is something that I personally have not experienced in a while, but seeing that it is something that people experience, I wanted to talk about why this is happening and what you can do to address it. So, number one, the first and foremost, like we just have not changed the way we write software. People tend to think that because you're working with AI, that the code and how the application is written becomes this convoluted black box that we don't need to know anything about because we're no longer working on it. AI is. And so we're kind of ignore the fundamental architecture or good practices of any given software application. The issue, of course, is that we have not changed how we write code. If 5 years ago we had to go through 10 specific steps to get something written, today it's the same 10 steps that we have to go through. The difference is 5 years ago, I would write the 10 steps. Now I have an AI agent write the 10 steps, but there's still those 10 steps. Now, we also don't have any AI specific architectures or AI specific programming languages to use. So nothing got easier from an AI perspective when it comes to software development. The AI agents that we use are trained on our code bases, on the stuff that we write, and on the stuff that in the programming languages that we as people, as human beings, understand and can work in. So until we get to that next level where everything is like nearly machine language and, just works perfectly out of the box without us having any knowledge of how any of it works, we are still in that cycle of using good software practices when building applications. And so some of those practices are having a fundamental architecture in place, using good patterns, avoiding certain things that we call anti-patterns or code smells, and basically having AI understand that guidance that we have to provide to the agent. It does not necessarily know that on its own. And so you don't have to learn application architecture in depth or great detail. The thing you want to keep in mind is that application works typically in layers. So for example, we might have something that interacts with our database. We would call that the database layer. And its only responsibility is ever to connect to the database, pull some data, write some data, do something with the database, and return some results. Now, it might return those results to what we call a business logic or a functional layer. And that layer is all of the different rules and how we want to see the data that we retrieve from the database. So this might be shaping the information from multiple tables at the database level into something that we see on one screen. And going up to that, we would show this information in what we call a UI layer. So that is your basic 3-tier architecture, which is very, very simple. And yet it has very defined layers of responsibility. So UI is responsible for showing things to you. Business logic is responsible for all of the functional and business logic of your application, all of the rules, the business rules. And then finally, you have that database layer, which only talks to the database. Now, obviously, not all the applications are that simple, and you may need additional layers here and there. If this is something that interests you and you want to learn more, comment down below, and I will do some more videos around basic architectures that we could use with AI. But for now, I'll leave it at this. So by creating that architecture and giving the AI certain patterns to use, like, hey, if a method already exists, don't create a new version of the same method for this new function. Try to reuse the same code. Make sure that you understand the layers and put relevant information into each of those layers. And of course, we can get AI to do all of this for us. We just have to instruct it to do this. And that is my second point. So the first one is architecture. The second one is guardrails. We want to make sure that the AI is confined to that architecture and always follows it. So if this is a Claude code application or if this is a cursor application, you could define rules which are stored in the project that explain all of this to your AI agent every time it runs. So every time, whether you have a new prompt or an existing prompt, you could tell it to deal with this and it'll go off and read this information and know how to structure your application. Again, if this is something that interests you and you would like to see some of these types of guardrails that I've put in place into some of my applications, I could redact some things and definitely show a list of things that I ask AI to make sure it understands before it writes any code. The next thing I want to talk about is context and prompting. So in my particular case, that story that I told you about, the dropdown, one of the things that I neglected to give the AI is all of the context around that dropdown. My prompt was probably something like, hey, I have this dropdown on this page. I need you to, turn this into a lookup table and create a service that pulls this data and populates the dropdown from the database. And what I suspect happened is that the AI did a search. For whatever reason, that third page got left out of that initial search, that finding. And so it said, okay, I found these two things. I'm going to address them. And it went off and did it, never really considering that third one. So for us as developers, or if you want to call yourself an artist these days, you're totally capable of doing that, because we really are sort of the architects or the artists around what it is that we're getting AI to create. And you still need to understand that, hey, this thing appears on 3 separate pages. And so at the very least, I need to make a reference in this prompt to these 3 pages so the AI has a better understanding of which dropdown I'm talking about and what I want done with it. So context is very, very important. And then the other thing you want to watch out for is that the context could grow too big. Anything above 75 to 80% of, or 85% of your context window is okay. But beyond that point, the AI could hallucinate more, could forget things that it knew earlier on, and basically the output that you get starts to degrade. So it's important for us to make sure that we work through it and keep the context under 75%, and that we tell it everything that we need it to do before it writes code. And this also involves, of course, a plan. In most cases, if I'm working with Cursor or Claude Code, I do ask it to build me a plan around the more complicated features. There are certain things like little bug fixes that I will just let it do on its own without planning. But anything that I feel I don't have a full understanding of, and I need it to tell me exactly where it's going to change and where, and I'm going to read that plan, and I'm going to go and look at some of the code, and I'm going to validate how that works. I think it's important to do that to make sure you get a good result. The last thing I'm going to say is that if you're not using Git, you absolutely should be, because Git is your undo button. And this is the fourth and last tip that I have for you for today. Git allows us to store our iterations in source control. And it's great because we can go back to a previous iteration, undoing the changes that the AI did. So one of the things that I am adamant about doing when I'm working with any agent is that when I have something working and it's working correctly and I'm happy with the result, I will check that result in. And this happens more frequently than you would realize, right? Most of the time, my AI agent gives me good results, and so I'll test them and I will check them in. This allows me to go back to that previous state if I ever get caught in that infinite loop of, hey, I fixed this, but I broke this other thing. I fixed this other thing, but now I broke this. And so if you want to prevent that, one of the easier ways that you could do that is you roll back to that previous version. You then try maybe a different model, and you try a different prompt to solve your problem. So it's not always about fixing what you've already started within the context of a specific session or prompt, but rolling back just a little bit so you can go further, because you can refine and maybe make a prompt more clear than it was. One of my biggest use cases for this, for example, is that I tend to work on 3 or 4 different prompts at the same time within the same project. And that's because, while they're planning and while they're figuring things out, I can, go between multiple ones. I don't execute all 4 at once, but I iterate through each one after the other. And so there definitely been cases where I'll want something to happen and I'll put it in the wrong prompt. So I'll message it and tell it to do something, but it's in the wrong prompt session. So it meant for prompt number 2, but I put it into prompt number 3. And so when that happens and it doesn't quite understand what I want, it goes off and works on something and then creates a mess, it's easy for me to roll back. Now, if you use something like Cursor or Claude Code, they both have features built in that let you revert what was just done. So easy enough from that perspective, but Git is your baseline security. It's your backup for everything that you do. All right. Well, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, share, and like, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.